Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, and our guest this time is Fiona Clark. Fiona is an Australian journalist with two twin passions, health and politics. She previously worked for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and was a correspondent in the Soviet Union at the time it collapsed. She returned to Australia and worked as a reporter and then producer on the equivalent of Newsnight before leaving the ABC to move to medical publishing in the early 2000s. She moved with her family back to Russia for what was supposed to be a year but ended up being 10 or so, and then moved to London where she set up Harley Street Emporium with the aim of delivering evidence-based information about skincare to women, which quickly evolved into menopausal health. And for the last 5 years, she's carried out thousands of interviews with menopause experts and many amazing women talking about their experiences. More recently, she's launched the Menopause Research and Education Fund, and that's why I asked her to come and chat to me today to tell us more about why such a charity is needed and what their plans are for the future. Welcome to the podcast, Fiona.
Thank you very much.
That's quite a colourful bio CV. Whichever way you slice and dice it. Have you? Do you get back to Australia often, or are you?
No, I haven't been back actually for it's probably coming up for 10 years for the last time that I went back. And that was when I ran into Dr. Ginny Mansberg, who said, I've launched this amazing range of evidence-based skincare. Do you want to try it? And I tried it. And I had to go back to be fingerprinted for a visa for the UK. And so I had this whole great big business plan that I was going to do X business for this. And I tried her skincare products. And I thought, my God, these are actually really good. They're evidence-based and they're great. I'm going to throw my business plan out the window and I'm going to bring these to the UK. So that didn't work. But what I noticed when I was doing the research for pulling her stuff together and bringing it in was that everything you read in a magazine about skincare is advertorial. It's not editorial, it's advertorial. It's there to sell you something. And it's so lacking in evidence base that I thought this is not good enough. We need to do something about that. So I set up Harley Street Emporium, as you say, with the aim of giving people evidence-based information, and it quickly evolved because menopause is really my passion, I think. So I just sort of fell into that.
Well, we've certainly got that in common. So, for anyone that hasn't heard yet about the Menopause Research and Education Fund, it's not a charity yet, but you're well on the way to becoming one. What on earth made you decide to set up a charity? And it's in conjunction with two other people. Can you talk to us about who they are and why they're so important?
Absolutely. The process of becoming a charity is long and arduous. You have to prove to the Charities Commission that you are acting charitably, that you have an annual income of at least £5,000.
Mm-hmm.
So to do that, you've got to raise the money and you've got to start acting charitably, which is what we're doing. You also have to have trustees. So over the last 5 years, with all of the literally, there have been thousands of interviews that I've been doing. I've become sort of, I guess, close in some ways to various people, and you have to have trustees on your board. And the people who I chose as trustees to help me with this process are Diane Danzebrink, who's one of the original campaigners for getting menopause onto the agenda, and it was her set of mandates, I guess, really that got the menopause onto the curriculum in schools.
Yeah.
Has succeeded in getting medical students being educated in menopause from next year onwards, and she's still pushing for better education for everybody, compulsory education for GPs, and better workplace situations. So lovely Diane agreed to help me with this, as did Vikram Talalika. Now Vikram is a gynecologist and passionate advocate for women's health, really from fertility issues right through to menopause, very evidence-based, and is just a fantastically trustworthy individual. So he too agreed to back us with this, because literally every time I do an interview with somebody, we get to that point where I say, and what do we know about the evidence for this? And what do we know about, the long-term safety of that? And what do we know about this? And the answer is always the same sort of, well, we don't really, because, we don't have the
Yeah,
research.
because it's only 50% of the population that goes through it. So why would we bother?
Exactly. And I just thought, God, is this becoming a broken record almost? And I thought, well, if nobody else is going to do this, then I will, because it just seems that it is an area that is crying out for research for everything from from the supplements all the way through to the HRT and other treatments, there needs to be so much more research done. We know certain aspects of it, like, HRT will help with hot flushes and vasomotor
Mm.
symptoms, but we don't really know what the long-term effects if you're on it for 20 or 30 years, because we don't have the data. So we need to start looking at these sorts of things. We also, there are so many questions as well about, is HRT preventative for dementia or is it not? Just so many questions that we need to have looked at. And there are people who are doing research, but in the end, a lot of it is not independent. And I think that that is a really important factor, that you have an independent body that can fund research. And governments do that. You can apply for government grants to get funding for things, but there's a limited resource there, as everything always is. And I don't think that women's health often comes at the top of that, at their agenda,
No,
unfortunately.
it's a very small percentage, isn't it, of sort of total
2.5
research funding.
2.5% of health budget is spent on women's health research, which is not a lot.
Yeah. So you surveyed as part of your sort of launch for the organisation. You sort of put a survey out there asking people, women in particular, what sort of topics they would like to see researched, and what were the ones that came out on top?
Well, interesting actually. Some of them you won't be surprised about. You will have heard of a lot of these. Migraines, headaches, that was
Mm,
one that was, that a lot of people asked about. Um, HRT post-cancer, that was another one that people really wanted information on. Mental health, um, joint pain, that was an interesting one, because what helps with joint pain, stress management and those kinds of things. What's the impact of stress on menopause? That was an interesting one. Long-term effects of HRT. Testosterone, does it not
mm.
clear brain
Definitely
fog?
very much in the news
Yes,
over recent
exactly.
months for
Yeah,
sure.
the one that I find really interesting, mainly because I'm going through this Nutrigestin hell myself at the moment, is what is the correct dose of Nutrigestin that we should be having, to stop unexplained bleeding, those kinds
Right.
of things. So they're really diverse. Some of them are really quite specific and focused, and some of them were sort of much more sort of big picture. But generally, a lot of interest in a lot of areas.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying there about the Eutrogestan, because obviously, for a lot of people starting on HRT, whichever healthcare professional they'll see will quite often recommend that they sort of start on a low dose and maybe build up. But we know that people absorb their HRT differently if they've got it transdermally, or they'll react differently to different ways of delivering it. And really, we know so little, don't we, about those kind of interactions, and sort of there's no real kind of personalized care that we can do in that way, because it is just very much, well, let's try it and see, and kind of fiddle upwards downwards with different kind of dosages, and try and find that sweet spot. So hopefully that's also something that research can look at in the future, so that we can be a bit more precise about these things.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, with people who are on very high doses of estrogen, we Vikram was telling me the other day, they are seeing a very significantly sharp rise of people coming in who
Mm.
are having investigations for unexplained bleeding. And so it's really important that we know, that we know how that package goes together, I guess, when we're trying to get that balance, so you're protecting the endometrium but still keeping your symptoms under control.
In terms of where you would like the organisation to kind of go over the next few years, what are your plans? I mean, you're kind of in a fundraising stage at the moment.
That's a very big question. Of course, I have giant ideas in my head. I am hoping that this will evolve into the preeminent independent menopause research charity once we sort of get things going. But it is going to be a very, very long haul. And I understand, it's if you're a charity that raises money for clean water in Africa, or for vaccines for curing a disease, or curing cancer, you've got a very big statement out there. But menopause is very there's no there is no cure, there is no disease, if you know what I mean. It's one of those sorts of things where you just got to think, okay, there's an economic cost to it, there's a personal cost to it, there are relationship costs to it, there are health consequences down the road. And, with an aging population, we're going to be living an awful
Mm.
lot longer as postmenopausal women, and our health is going to be affected. So there are lots of avenues that need to be looked at, but if you're sort of giving it the hard sell of sort of like, your £2 is going to buy clean water and vaccines for children for the next 6 months. This is a harder sell.
It's not quite as emotive, but
Yes, exactly. I'm not going to be curing cancer. I'm not going to be doing all of those sorts of things. But hopefully, we can. The aim is to have a really good pot of money. So when people come and they say, I want to do research on X, we'll apply the ethical. Go through like a
Mhm.
ethical council would of looking at is this a good research thing to fund, and over time we will develop a really good pool of independent research. So that's nice. And the other thing that we were thinking of doing as well, once we get a decent pool of money, is saying, okay, this is a question that we want answered, like say the progesterone one and unexplained bleeding. We'll pay a PhD student to go through the data in these data banks and pull together some research on that, so we get a much better picture of who was on what dose when they had the bleeding and why. So we know that there's a cause and effect there that we can actually look at, so you can work out what's actually happening. So we're hoping that we'll work both ways, that people will come to us and say, we want funding for this research, and that we'll work the other way as well with saying, okay, we want to fund X, so we've got the answers as well.
Yeah, because quite often, though, if we pick out something like sort of Alzheimer's, for example, there are a lot of different studies out there looking, which are showing potentially quite opposing results in terms of whether it's protective or not protective. So presumably, if you've got somebody who could go and look across all of the different studies and kind of draw out, as you said, the sort of the data from those different data sets and do a meta-analysis, then maybe we end up with some kind of new information that way as well.
Yeah, it's a difficult one too, because you're comparing different types of
Mm,
hormones that have been used. Some studies are observational. Some have actually been looking at people in real time. Some of them, they're all different. So you're often comparing an orange with an apple, which does sort of give those conflicting results sometimes, which is difficult, especially when you're looking at the older forms of HRT and people who were given it later in life rather than when they should have started in their sort of perimenopause sort of menopause sort of time. So you're looking at very different things, and that's sometimes where I think the conflicting information comes out.
yeah, and would you see that the MREF would have a role as well in sort of trying to kind of explain to the general population when these kind of emotive studies come out and the media is suddenly all over it, and sort of helping us to actually understand more deeply than sort of tabloid headlines will necessarily give us, really giving people the context and as you say, the evidence base, drilling down into what's actually going on behind the headlines.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially getting that across to the medical professionals. So there are a couple of missions for the charity, and one is the research. The other is making sure that all health professionals get access to evidence based education, and the third is that all people who go through menopause who need evidence based information have access to it at all. So yes, we will definitely be doing a lot of that explaining of what X means. I do a lot of that now already on Harley
Mm.
Street Emporium. When something comes out, I spend an awful lot of time going through and talking to people about what did this study mean, how come it's different from that one, what can we draw from it. So yes, that will be a very big mainstay of what it is that we actually do, making sure that things are explained to people so they've got the right kind of information and they can make informed decisions about their own health.
Yeah, and that's sort of both the blessing and the curse of social media, isn't it? We can get all kinds of information and reaction and statements of fact, in inverted commas, on there. But actually having organisations like this that are sort of trustworthy and that people know are kind of unbiased, independent, uh, evidence based, and factual So important.
And I think it's difficult to when you're still working in an area where, because, evidence constantly changes too. And
Mm,
so that's the other sort of evolving thing, like the North American Menopause Society put out their position statement on non-hormonal therapies a week or so ago, what works, what doesn't. And, in the 8 years since they did it last time, a lot changed. So things moved from the recommended to the not recommended list, or vice versa. And there were a lot of surprises in it, actually, with things that people didn't expect, things that we've been told that would help us, such as exercise,
mhm.
mindfulness, those kinds of things. They were put in the not recommended list. Yoga, that made a lot of people very unhappy. Supplements, that went into the not recommended. Not a single supplement was
This
found
was
to be useful,
specifically for the vasomotor
specifically
symptoms.
for the
Yeah.
vasomotor treatments. So, but that the things about exercise and dietary modification and things like that, avoiding triggers. That was one that we were always told, avoid triggers. That went into the not recommended list. So
Mm,
over time, things do change, and I think that confuses people. And we like black and white, and when things change, that often makes people. I don't know. I think it makes people feel uncomfortable. I think they lose a bit of trust somehow, because we like a black and white answer, but sometimes it isn't that way. I mean, I guess that would be a one other thing that's really important for us to be able to get across is not to fear change when evidence moves. To be happy.
mm.
Somebody's looked at something and they've learned something, so let's move with it.
I think part of the problem is just that sheer volume of information. As you know, if you're not a specialist, just kind of you're constantly bombarded with what can sometimes be kind of conflicting viewpoints. So, as you say, trying to kind of keep tabs on what is the most up to date and the most rigorous, uh, and kind of evidence based research can be quite tricky. So I think, yeah,
Yeah, and evaluating the quality of that information, because actually you said they're rigorous studies. That's, how do you define what is good evidence? Well, there are levels. So they have a levels of, from 1 to 5 rating them. But, unless you really sort of looked into that, you'll see a study that says, 12 women who took pumpkin seeds solved their
mm,
bladder issues. And then, a supplement will appear and they'll say, we've got clinical studies to prove this. But, in the end, what's the quality of those? It's if it's very small, if it's done by the company that is making the product, if it's funded by the product manufacturer, there are so many things that you've got to look into when you're looking at how was the study even structured? Did it go for long enough? So
mm.
many things that go into it. It's a big job to sift through all of that.
We definitely need to be kind of curious and carefully cynical, perhaps, in
Yeah.
terms of the claims that are made by some companies out there. I mean, in terms of if people want to support the MREF, are there a couple of different ways that people can get involved beyond sort of individual donations? I think you're also looking for sort of companies to get involved and sponsor
Absolutely.
the organisation, not sponsor it, but to be kind of big supporters.
There are many ways that people can get involved. And what we would really like, well, yes, obviously donations. If you want to make a donation, you can go to the mref.uk website. There are multiple buttons on there screaming at you, donate. Then we also have a GoFundMe page, so people can go there. If people want to run an event or host an event themselves and raise money and donate it, that would be absolutely fantastic. I need help. I'm by myself doing this pretty much. If anybody's got any skills that they'd like to donate to me, that would be a really lovely thing. What else? Oh, we're thinking of we're going to run auctions on a regular basis. So if people have goods or services that they'd like to donate, that we can auction off once I've worked out how to legally do it. Um, that would be a lovely thing. And I'm open to suggestion. And yes, once we've got that charity status in place, it would be absolutely fantastic if people have companies or if they work in large workplaces. If we could become your company charity, that would be a really nice thing for the year. I understand a lot of companies do that kind of thing, where they have a chosen charity for the year and do stuff in the workplace and donate money for it. That would be a
Mm.
beautiful thing. I'm happy for sport in any way, shape, or form, really.
Well, we're definitely seeing a rise in companies going for the sort of menopause friendly accreditation and that kind of thing. So you would hope that if they're putting resource behind that kind of thing, that they would also be interested in supporting the charity.
Yeah, yep, you would really hope so. That would be a good thing because it's a policy is a nice thing, but actually, to have, you know, come to the site, get your resources, do whatever you need in that sort of respect. We're happy to make things a sort of to help where we can as well, not just take. We're happy to give. So
And so, yeah, hopefully, sort of over the next couple of years, you'll be able to expand and sort of maybe take on a bigger team of people once you'll be able to access more funding.
yes, I hope so. That would be a very good thing. I mean, I know, money is tight at the moment, but as Diane was saying a while back, even if you've got £1, if you've signed that petition, if everybody who signed her Make Menopause
Mm.
Matter petition donated £1, we'd have £200,000 almost now. So and £1 isn't a huge amount. So hopefully people can do that. Just pledge £1. We'll be happy.
There you go, dear listeners. So I will put in the show notes a link to the website, the MREF. I hope you're able to support it too. I think it is desperately needed independent research. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, and I know you've just got so much energy that you're putting behind it, Fiona. I know it will succeed.
I hope so. I'm not a big fan of failure, but then, as they say, actually, failure is not a failure. Just look at it as a learning curve. But, I hope we won't go there. I know, people get very up. I was reading something yesterday about menopause and a woman saying, I'm not a feminist and I don't want to be put in the same bandwagon as people who have, mental health issues when they go through menopause. I'm fine. So why do I have to have this be labeled with the same
Mm,
thing? And I kind of was thinking, I know it can be a divisive topic, but in the end, we're talking about women's health. We're talking about long-term health here. It's not just a matter of getting through menopause and
mm,
dealing with the symptoms. Then it goes beyond that. Your vasomotor symptoms today, if they're not well controlled, can really make a big difference to your risk for dementia. And we need to know who then are the people who are really at risk. We need to be able to target them early so we can make sure that their risks for what's going to happen to them 30, 40 years down the line is they're in a better shape when they get to the other end of the line, really. So these are the sorts of things that matter.
yeah, it's so much more than that sort of kind of acute period of time, isn't it, where people might
Yeah,
be having severe symptoms? Because, as you say, I think I read a stat the other day about 1 in 6 of us will be living to 100 or beyond. So yeah, obviously, if we're living such big chunks of our lives without those hormones, we need to know what 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 that actually means, what are the implications, and
exactly. And I think what was something came out the other day that by 2040 the burden of disease would I think it was about 30% higher than what it is now because we're living longer and the cost to the economy of that is huge. So
mm.
really, we need to make sure that we're living as healthily as we can for as long as we possibly can, and we need to know what all the tools that we need for that.
Well, Fiona, thanks so much for coming on, talking to us about the Menopause Research and Education Fund. As I say, I'll pop a link into the show notes so everyone can find out a bit more about it.
That would be lovely. And, get in touch, ask any questions you like, tell me what you want to see researched.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you. Take care.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.